So in week four, you deal a lot with the manager and overhead systems, legislators,
Right.
and just other elected officials.
Right.
What would be the caucus nugget, the governor of the caucus nugget for week four?
That Dukakis one failed badly to involve legislators in what he was doing, even though he was a former legislator. And Dukakis, too, having been thrown out of the place and having returned 4 years later, sat a bit wiser, never made that mistake again. When I came back in '83, we never went down the policy road without involving key legislators actively from day one. And of course, as well as advocacy groups and other elected officials, say attorneys general or auditors or folks who can and must be part of that process. Now, why didn't I get it the first time? Probably because I was the head of the rebels in the legislature. I was still kind of in my combat role, and I just didn't understand how important it was to involve legislators actively, even though, I'd have been thrilled to do so had a governor asked me to be involved, and not many of them did either. It wasn't just personal to me. I mean, they didn't do it very well. But what you discover is that if you reach out to your legislators and who you know are very much involved and care a lot about this particular policy area, and you bring them into the process, for one thing, they'll help you to make the policy better. And for another, having gotten ownership in it, if you will, Bob Graham in the Graham case talks about buying stock, making sure your legislators buy stock in the program. It's kind of an interesting phrase, but that's what he's talking about. Get them involved early. They not only help you to make the policy better, they're your spear carriers on the floor of the legislature, because it's now their policy as much as yours. And if you're successful, comes time to sign the bill and do all of that stuff, they get a generous measure of praise for it, and everybody feels good. Now, why don't more elected officials do that? Well, some of them do, some of them don't. Certainly, the President of the United States made every effort he could to involve key legislators, especially Republicans, in the health reform process. For a while, it seemed to be working. Then Senator Grassley got a right-wing opponent. That was the end of him. And then I think unwisely, the President and the people around him and Democrats in the legislature didn't pick up on Senator Snow's suggestion for a public option with a trigger. And I think tactically that was just probably not a good idea. But you certainly can't fault this president for not understanding the importance of involving legislators, and maybe the fact that he was a legislator. And by the way, with extensive experience, 8 years in the state Senate in Illinois before he became a United States Senator. I think probably that had something to do with his willingness to do this. And no matter what happens in the elections, I think you will see him try to continue to do that. Interesting to see whether or not the Republicans have any interest in engaging that kind of process. But I do remember, this is an interesting story, I do remember Kitty and I being in the Oval Office with Bill Clinton at the time of the budget crisis in 1995, when Gingrich was threatening to shut down the government. And Clinton had met repeatedly with Dole and Gingrich to try to resolve this. I mean, he had 10 meetings in 3 weeks or something, which was quite unusual. I mean, he had meetings regularly, but not 10 meetings in 3 weeks around this budget issue. And I'll never forget, just the three of us, he said, he was in the middle of this thing, and I said, how's it going? He said, Mike, he said, they're just different from us. And what was he saying? He's saying, philosophically, whether we like it or not, Democrats and Republicans, in many cases, not all, are really in two different worlds. I mean, it's sad to say, but when a guy like Mike Castle is defeated in his own party primary in Delaware, the chances for reaching across the aisle and coming to, I mean, I served with Castle. He was a governor, and I was a governor. We worked together on welfare reform. Wonderful guy. I mean, it's painful. Okay, so the Democrats are going to win the seat. That's good news as far as I'm concerned, but it's painful. So we'll see. But I don't care how tough they are. You make that effort, and you try to bring them to the table. And if you're talking about health care, you say to them, hey guys, can we agree that working people and their families ought to have decent, affordable health care in the United States. Can we at least agree on that?
Hmm.
Now, if they say no, that's a problem. And every once in a while, you will have groups. At the state and local level, it's pretty limited. I mean, I call them kind of the social issues is not. These are issues of fundamental morality. I mean, abortion, not abortion, gay marriage, not gay marriage, and so forth. And those things, you may have difficulty achieving consensus. But even so, the fact that you're working together, listening to each other, tomorrow it may be on foster care and adoption. And there, right-to-lifers and choice people can and should be able to get together. So that's important. But getting those folks in early, and legislators in particular, no matter where they're coming from, I think is essential. I wouldn't do it on television. I mean, I thought the president made a mistake in just saying we're going to televise this. You don't get things done, with television cameras operating.
So for those that haven't been engaged, and obviously at such a high level, what would be some of the transferable skills? I mean, obviously you mentioning, kind of developing better relationships, but how does that look practically? So just say you have a public manager that wants to develop a better relationship with someone that they need to work on an issue with. I mean, What does that look like in terms of?
You make a list.
Okay.
You create a working group. You decide whether you're going to chair it or whether you're going to have staff chair it, and you begin working together, meeting together on a regular basis, setting some deadlines for yourselves. Doesn't have to be 3 days, but a matter of weeks, a few months, whatever. And you do everything you can to work with these folks and to try to achieve a solution, a consensus solution. Now, by that I don't mean a lowest common denominator solution. In many cases, it will be better than the one you originally may have been thinking about, because these folks know a lot, and they know things you don't know. And if the kind of, I've talked about this chemistry developing, it's hard to describe it until you've been in it. But you bring people together, you have good leadership, you have skilled staff people. And it's amazing what happens when folks kind of park their pre-existing notions at the door and sit down as human beings and start talking about real problems. And in a remarkably large number of cases, it will work. But you've got to understand it, and you've got to almost train yourself almost instinctively to proceed in that way. And if you do, you're going to be a much more successful manager than if you don't.